guess that's the best way to put it, is that we naturally have a will to live, and this is something that is God-given, and because of that, we have a duty and the right to defend ourselves if we are attacked. Now, we're skipping forward a little, but this is great, because this is part of the, I think, a really interesting difference between Aquinas and Augustine, and it just starts to flower out into the just war doctrine. Because when he talks about having a duty, a right, and sometimes a duty to defend yourself, he starts to get into something really interesting, and that is the doctrine of proportionality, which you'll see on your just war criteria. Now, he does not talk about self-defense under his 4 questions of what makes a war just. He talks about it instead in question, I believe it's 14 of the Summa Theologica. I can't remember what part, but the title of the question is of murder. All right, so we're not talking self-defense where you just push somebody back to get them out of the way. Of murder, and I believe it's question 5 or 6. You can look it up, or it'll be on the outline when we post it later on. I can probably flip to it. But the question that St. Thomas Aquinas deals with is this: when does self-defense become sinful? When is it okay, and when does it become sinful? And he's got 3 categories. He's got when self-defense is okay, when it's a venial sin, and when it's a mortal sin. Now, does anybody want to, because it's really a little bit intuitive, does anybody want to guess when self-defense is okay, when it's a venial sin, and when it's a mortal sin?
Mortal, probably when it goes way beyond necessary to protect yourself.
Goes way beyond, and what would be the disposition of your heart if it's when it's a mortal sin?
The vengeance.
Right. Anger, of vengeance. This should be echoing with what we've discussed earlier, because remember what Augustine said, the inward disposition of the heart. That's where the right intention comes in. So that a mortal sin, self-defense is not always wrong. When would it be, in fact, let's go back to the opposite end. When do you think Aquinas might say that self-defense is okay?
When you're doing it to protect,
just to protect yourself.
Protect yourself.
And not with the object of actually killing whoever's attacking you. Just defend them all.
Self-preservation.
Right, I think you're right, when it's not the object of killing somebody. And by saying that, you all have hit 2 things. You've hit the outward action and the inward disposition of the heart. All right. Now, why might this relate to proportionality on your just war criteria sheet?
Because you're not the military necessity for José and Bilal. You're not using more force than necessary.
Exactly. And how might it relate to right intention on the front page of the sheet?
So you're doing it to defend yourself and not to be aggressive, or
Right, right. Your intent is to defend yourself. Your intent is not to kill the other person. That's exactly right. So that for Aquinas, because we are given the gift of life, and we naturally have a will to live and to be a part of a commonwealth. This is all very Aristotelian. We are endowed with the right to defend ourselves when we are attacked. However, the 2 things when you defend yourself that must happen in order for that self-defense to be not sinful is, number 1, and this is what you see in criminal law today. This is exactly, when I've done cases and had to deal with assaults, this is exactly what the issue of self-defense relies on. And that is that the amount of force used to defend yourself must be proportional to the threat, to the attack, right? So that what that means is if somebody's coming towards you and they've got their fist back, all right,
Don't pull a gun.
you can't pull out an Uzi, and just take them out, all right? But if they're coming at you and they have a knife in their hand, well, you're starting to get closer to the Uzi analogy. I'm not saying that that's okay, all right, but I'm saying that there's a spectrum. And this is exactly what Aquinas says. So that's the outward act. It has to be proportional. And the inward act, though, and this is not in criminal law because you can't measure this, or certainly not in criminal law, and that is when you're defending yourself, it can't be out of hatred for the other person, but out of a desire to self-preserve, self-preservation.
This gets to the venal aspect.
Right, right.
Where you would then, I think, draw the line between taking the act to protect yourself, but not reveling in the act or not glorying in the act.
Right, right. And Yeah, let me get to what he
That's
said.
one of those inward things.
Exactly. In fact, I'll quote what he said. I didn't know we'd get to this, but this is
You can
great.
take them down, but you can't feel good about it.
Right, exactly. That's it. That's it. You can take them down, but you can't feel good about it. You cannot glory.
End zone war dances are not appropriate.
Right. You can't spike the ball. No high fives. But that's exactly right. This is what he said, and I'll quote this because I think what we're discussing now is fascinating because it's so different from the earlier. Well, it's not that it's so different, but it is a difference. It is a gravitation more towards where we are today from Augustine and from the early church fathers. And what Aquinas said is, if his sole intention, the person being attacked, is to withstand the injury done to him, and he defend himself with due moderation, it is no sin. But if his self-defense be inspired by vengeance and hatred, see, he hasn't even said anything about due moderation going away. Now he's talking about the inward disposition. If it is inspired by vengeance and hatred, it is always a sin. And then he says it is a venial sin if a slight movement of hatred or vengeance obtrude him. Okay? And it is a mortal sin if he makes for his assailant with the fixed intention of killing him or inflicting grievous harm on him. This is almost the exact language in our Uniform Code of Military Justice, talking about the infliction of grievous bodily harm and killing. It's really interesting to me. And I'm sure it's the same in civilian criminal law as well, because none of us are in a vacuum on this. Now, I think that's a very interesting issue. He does not here talk about non-combatant immunity. He never does. But we're kind of starting to get into that a little bit as well. So anyway, I don't know who brought up the topic of self-defense, but whoever did, thank you. I think that's very interesting. And we may get back to it. Okay.
You know, as another little aside in this whole thing, it's appropriate to talk about that in this particular state because it is a state which has concealed carry as an option for citizens.
That's a good point.
And because it's been a feature that has grown so rapidly in the state of Virginia, it's probably something that should be included in the training that folks who avail themselves of that right to take into consideration. Because I think if they end up defending themselves, they may have to give account for their actions, and this would be a good basis for them to understand what their responsibilities are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. Yes. Susan.
As far as the self-defense issue goes and the proportionality, how does that sync with military strategy and the active surprise and the best defense is a good offense?
Oh.
You have just hit.
Yeah, dare I say
No, this is great. I can't believe you're hitting this because we weren't going to get to any of this. Aquinas addresses both of those issues. The question about what you're asking about, I'm going to rephrase it to make sure that I fit it into my Aquinas mold, is the laying of ambushes, the tactics of surprise and ambush, and how far can you go in deceiving the enemy? Can you go absolutely as far as you need to go to win the war? Is there a place you draw the line? Can you deceive the enemy at all, or is it a lie? These were issues that Aquinas struggled with, but came out basically saying you can lay ambushes, but you can't. You can do a lie, but you can't tell a lie. Okay, you can lay ambushes, but you can't. You have to keep good faith with the enemy.
You can't send a message going, "Oh, I'm going to be right here."
You can't throw up the white flag, surrender, come out and say, "Here we are." Excuse, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. That's right. And then the other side comes out.
Changed my mind.
Right, and then you've got. Well, actually, I put the weapon behind my back. There is a code of conduct in war that requires you to keep good faith, but you can certainly lay deceptive devices, ambush the enemy, and do things like that. Your other question is about offensive versus defensive war. Neither Aquinas nor Augustine had any problem with offensive war, as long as it fit the just war criteria. If you recall, and I believe it is on the criteria sheet, self-defense was one reason to go to war, but what were the other reasons?
Right or wrong?
Right. What about?
Well, protecting property was one of them.
How about the punishment of evildoers?